Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A'udhu billahi minash shaitani rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala sayyidina wa nabiyyina Abil Qasim Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ala alihi tayyibin tahirin. La siyama maulana wa sayyidi sahib al-asri wa zaman ruhi wa arwahul alamin lahul fidah wa ajjalallahu ta'ala farajuhu sharif. أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. This evening, in our continuation of the commentary of Surah al-Hadid, chapter number 57 of the Holy Quran, the chapter of the iron, in session number 17 today, we want to continue in the review of this chapter. And as a reminder, the main overall theme of this chapter has been the topic of the institutionalization of charity, of how Allah has made it a part and parcel of Islam to give to others, whether this be giving of our wealth, our time, our efforts, our knowledge. All of these can be combined in this discussion of giving to others. Obviously, one of the most important needs that we may find that people have is wealth, is money, because money can put food on the table. Money can pay the bills. Money can buy the medication that we need. But obviously, money is just one of the aspects of what we should be giving and contributing to society. And again, we've talked about this in the past, so I don't want to go over it too much. But those who have been given knowledge, for example, their obligation, their charity, we can say, is to give the knowledge back to those who are in need of it. Those who have any kind of talent should be giving back to their communities, not just their faith community, not just the Muslims of the community, but to society on a whole. They should be giving back of their talents, of their expertise, of their know-how, to help further humanity and to help those who are in difficult situations to come out of the difficulties that they are going through. Now we continue tonight in this commentary, and we'll be looking at verse number 22. And in this section, we want to look at the topic of everything is known in God's knowledge before it happens. Now, obviously, there may be people who may be thinking right off the top of this discussion, well, if God knows what's going to happen beforehand, before we do it, is there not some level of predetermination of everything in our lives? It's a valid question to ask. Some may be wondering, if everything is predetermined, then what is the benefit of going to heaven for the good people, because God, quote unquote, forced them to do good because he knew about it? What is the crime of the person who goes to hell and suffers because God knew that they're going to do it, the crime? So are they not penalized before even they act, because God knows all that before it happens? And we'll try and look at some of those aspects today, but obviously that is a very lengthy, deep philosophical discussion and trying to understand the knowledge of Allah, the knowledge of God. And so obviously we may not be able to go into all of the details today, but let's see how far we can get into this discussion of understanding verse number 22 of the chapter of Surah al-Hadid. So we go to the verse under review for tonight, and Allah says, ما أصاب من مصيبة في الأرض ولا في أنفسكم إلا في كتاب من قبل أن نبرأها إن ذلك على الله يسير. No affliction. And here I want to be very careful to define affliction. And this is based on the commentary of His Eminence Ayatollah al-Udhma Sheikh Jawadi Amali in his Tafseer Tasneem under chapter 57's commentary, where he defines this term musiba, ma asaba min musibatin, no affliction. That, and I will develop this a little later on in our discussion, that the musibat here, this word can refer to anything both pleasing or also detested. So Allah is saying that no affliction, whether it's pleasant for you or it's detested, occurs on the earth, fil ardh, such as earthquakes, such as tornadoes, floods, wars, tsunamis. All of these, what we would call, and what modern science may call a natural disaster. Although even, if you look in many insurance policies, when it comes to disasters like floods or tsunamis or Earthquakes, they will call them acts of God. At least traditionally, this is what the terminology was used. So it seems that traditional humanity, the people of the earlier days, earlier meaning even in the last 20 to 30 years, they recognized acts of God as being things which could not be insured against. In any case, that's a different discussion, but God says there's no affliction, whether it's a good affliction or whether it's something which you detest, which occurs on earth. Again, earthquake, tornado, flood, war, tsunami, so on and so forth. وَلَا فِي أَنفُسِكُمْ, or within your own lives, within yourselves. Diseases. Today, November 2020, we're going through the COVID-19 pandemic, which has ravaged the entire world since early February or March. It obviously started much earlier in other parts of the world, late last year, maybe even up to June, July, August, September of 2019. But Allah is saying that, there's no affliction which occurs even in your own selves. And the commentators give the example of diseases, this pandemic that is ravaging humanity, or many other diseases that are out there today. People are suffering from cancer. People are suffering from many other challenges, life-altering circumstances, or damage in your properties, or loss of loved ones. Your loved ones pass away, parents, siblings, children, what have you. Allah says none of this happens in the world except it is recorded in a book before we bring it into existence. None of this happens except it is fi kitab, it is in a book. Min qabli an nabra'aha, that we bring into existence before. Inna dhalika ala Allahi yasir, and doing so is surely easy for Allah. Now, as I said, that this is a very lengthy discussion, and I know I won't have time to complete the entire discussion of this today. And so it's obviously up to the viewers to, do your own homework, do your own reading. There's much available actually in English, even on the topic of the knowledge of God, the divine justice, if you're interested in that. The late Murtada Mutahari, the great famous theologian, commentator of the Quran, really a man who was, well versed in many fields of Islamic studies and even the secular world. He has a book which is available in English called Divine Justice. It's been translated by a group of 3 different translators. And I would definitely highly recommend you to read that book. It does look at this topic. It looks at the topic of justice of God. Many times we wonder, why is it that seemingly good people are afflicted by the worst of sicknesses or diseases and pass away, whereas many times we see the tyrants, the despots, the people who commit, injustices around the world, who launch wars against innocent countries, who live to be 80, 90, 100 years old and seemingly, very happy individuals. So this is a topic, again, that is very lengthy. It's not something that we can really do justice to in this 30-minute slot that we have. But again, it's something that we all have to recognize the importance and relevance of. The Quran speaks about this in many different ways. We'll be looking at some of the verses tonight. But let me come back to this verse. Surah al-Hadid, chapter 57, verse 22, where God tells us clearly that there's not a single musibah and a single affliction, anything good that happens to you, or anything bad, which occurs in this earth or in our own lives, within our own selves, within this frame that we have as human beings, except it is recorded in a book before it comes into existence, before we, God says, bring it into existence. And so the first thing that we have to realize right at the top of it is that we are put on earth and we're under examination by God. God did not have to create us. He did not have to give us life, but He has done that. But then He's told us in the Quran, for example, in chapter 67, Surah Al-Mulk, where He says that الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتِ وَالْحَيَاةِ, that it is He, God, who has created death and life, لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا, to test you and I, to see, for us to prove to ourselves which of us is the best in conduct. So this theme of being tested is a theme within the Quran many times. This in itself should show us this belief in complete predestination is not accepted in the school of the Ahlul Bayt, in the school of the Prophet's family. Perhaps within the school of the companions, those who adhere to Islam as taught by fallible companions, companions who may have been very weak in their faith, very unknowing of the entire knowledge of the Quran, who are not aware of the life of the Prophet and his teachings, they may subscribe to complete free will, or rather complete predestination. And even there are some Muslims who believe in complete free will, who say that God created the world and then he just let it be, and that he has no say in governance of the world. So there are two extremes, either complete free will or complete predestination. And then there's the view of the Ahlul Bayt, the moderates of Islam, who are not extremists. The 12 Imams from the Ahlul Bayt, beginning from Imam Ali, all the way through to the 12th Imam, Imam al-Hujjat, Imam al-Mahdi, they do not teach an extreme form of Islam. They do not teach what other maybe denominations within Islam teach in terms of extreme forms of whatever. And so we are told by the Prophet and his family that it's neither complete free will, nor is it complete predestination, but rather they would say it is an amr, it is something between these two. And that's where we see, brothers and sisters, that this examination of humanity, that there are two different levels. There are things which can be avoidable. They can be avoided by certain means. So for example, there are certain things that we may go through in life, which we can remove from ourselves by giving in charity, for example. Hadith tell us that giving charity prevents 70 different possibilities or 70 different sicknesses or ailments or tragedies. Supplication, the Hadith tell us that nothing can change the fate of a human being like the supplication, like the dua can do. And that's why even in the month of Ramadan, and especially the nights of Qadr, we encourage ourselves and our family and the community to gather for prayer, for worship, to pray to God to change the destiny of the believer and the community and the Muslim community on a whole, because we truly believe, and hopefully we believe this. Otherwise, why do we pray to God after our daily prayers? Why do we gather, for example, on Tuesday nights to recite supplications? Why do we gather on Thursday night for the recitation of Dua Kumail? Why do we gather on the 15th of Sha'ban, or the nights of Ramadan, or many other nights of the year? Because we believe that supplication can change our fate, that some examinations can be changed through supplication, that we go that route every day, every week, every month, every year. Family ties, to establish the ties of our family, Silat Rahim, we're told, can change our fate. It can change the examinations we go through. And there are many verses of the Quran that tell us of the need to establish family ties. And whereas the Quran may not speak to breaking family ties as being something which can bring about calamity, Allah does tell us in many ayat that there are people وَيَقْتَعُونَ مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ أَن يُوصَلَ, that they break those things which Allah has commanded for them to unite with, and that is the family. And so hadith do tell us from the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt that when you break ties with your family members, with your blood relatives from the people of the womb that have bore you, that you run the risk of having some examinations from God which would be very difficult to go through. And things like a change in a lifestyle, in the way that we lead our lives, the sins that we may perform. All of these and many other factors are one of the ways to change some of the examinations that we go through. But with that said, also recognize the fact that at the second level, there are some tests, some levels of examination which are unavoidable. They will definitely happen. Things that are based on the wisdom of Allah. Now, I'm not going to sit here tonight and say that COVID-19 is one of those. But if it is an examination from God, we have to ask ourselves, what have I achieved? What is my mark? Have I passed this examination? Because ultimately it is a test from God, whether it comes directly from Him, like the flood of Prophet Noah, like the plagues that hit previous societies that were directly given by God, by Allah. But we don't know what is directly from Allah and what is indirect because of our own lifestyle choices, what people decide to eat. If they want to eat some strange animal found in a cave or in some animal that should not be eaten, and they have transmitted COVID-19 from that. Well, that's not God's fault. That's our own negligence that a change in our lifestyle would have resolved. It would not have even started. But we have to recognize the fact and submit that there are certain exams that we will not be able to overcome. Right? Death is one of those. You can be the most healthiest of people, a very good diet, strict regimen of exercise. You do all of the spiritual things you need. You give in charity, you pray, you fast, you go for a pilgrimage, you pray du'as, you maintain family ties, you do everything good. You could die at the age of 30. Just because you're healthy, it doesn't mean that you cannot die. And you hear this so many times. People pass away and you get a message and people ask, well, how did he die? How did she die? And people will say, well, he was a young man of 35, 30 years old, and he went to take a rest on the sofa and he never woke up again. An autopsy was inconclusive. Of course it was inconclusive, because nothing was wrong with the man or the woman. But it was their time. That was their test. And so certain things are unavoidable, right? Many things, or not many things, rather, there are things in our life which will happen to us in the course of our life on this earth, which we cannot avoid. They are meant to happen to us as a test by God. Based on His wisdom, they will happen no matter how much you give in charity. Sometimes people say that I gave charity every day. I give my khums, I do this, I do that. I've gone for ziyarah. I've done my hajj. Why did this happen to me? Don't ask why this happened to you. Say, why should this not happen to me? After all, I am a servant of God. I'm a servant of God, and I have to go through examinations in life. I can't do anything about that. That is the way God has made this world. Right? Surah al-Ankabut, it talks about the same thing, that Allah tells us that, do you think you'll be left alone? أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. Do people think that they will be left alone saying, we believe, now we're good, don't touch us, God? No, God says, do you think you will say that you believe and you will not be tested? وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. No, you will be tested. And maybe I would say that as a believer, as a Muslim man, as a Muslim woman, as a believing man, a believing woman, you may be tested more by God than those who don't believe. It's all about faith. The more the faith you have, as some hadith tell us, the more your examinations become. The weaker your faith becomes, the less the tests become. And it's not a universal rule, but it is one aspect to keep in mind. But let me mention this, brothers and sisters, because I don't want us to get the idea about testing and the implications that it has. Because if you see somebody who has good health and wealth, they could also be quote unquote sick. They could have a imtihan, a test, a musibah. And a person who has pure poverty and who's poor health-wise that is, they could also be sick and also be in a test. So don't think for a moment that it's only the people who are poor in third world countries, in countries that are impoverished, that are facing war and famine, that they are only the people under test by God. No. Actually, you and I living right now, if you're living in Canada and listening to me in Canada, in the comforts of your beautiful mansion, and you have money in the bank, and you have a beautiful car or 2 cars or 3 cars or 4 cars on your driveway, and you're living in opulence on your beautiful luxurious leather couch, and you're watching this on your 70-inch, plasma, LED, whatever television you're watching this on, you are also being tested with your wealth, with your health, with your wealth. Because your test, our test, my test is, what will I give out of what God has given me to the needy? I have health. Will I go and try and take care of the needy in my community? Will I go door to door? Obviously, keeping in mind that we're in COVID-19 times and we would have to be wearing PPE, the protective equipment, personal protective equipment. So I'm not encouraging this. But in normal times, am I concerned about my neighbors? Am I concerned about my members of my religious community? Are they all doing well? Can I check up on them? Am I giving donations to my center? to ensure that those who live in my particular city are being taken care of if they have financial problems? It's easy to give money overseas, out of sight, out of mind. You throw money in a box, you give it to your local organization or national or international charity, and you expect them to ship it off to, some country in Africa or India or Pakistan or the Middle East. But do you show concern for the people who are your neighbors? They have more of a right than people overseas in a foreign country. So we who have health, we are being tested by God in the most in the most way that would render our test successful. We who have wealth, and if you've got money in your bank account, today or 2 days ago rather, I was listening to one of the radio stations in Canada, and people were calling in about how the pandemic has affected them, and people were calling on the talk show saying that they've never made this much money in their life. Person called in who was a retired lab technician, and he went back to work. He thought he'd work 1 day a week, and now he's working 5-6 days a week, making, and he says, more money than he ever made when he worked full time in a hospital. And he was a man of God. He talked about the fact that him and his wife are giving to their local church and their local food bank and helping their family and friends that they know are needy. But that's an exam, right? And that's his passing of that test. Is God is seeing that, look, you have been given health, you have been given wealth. How will you use it? Because on that same talk show call in, people were calling who said that their funds, their savings have been completely decimated. They had to close down their hair salon. Some of them still had to pay rent. Okay, fine, they can lay off their staff, but rent has to be paid. Insurance has to be paid, and they're not making any money. So this time that we're living in is a great example of a test by God. Again, if it didn't come directly from God as how people want to think, then definitely we have to be seeing how are we being tested. Again, if you have not been contracted with COVID-19, may God bless you and your family. But if you have money in your bank account today and you know that people are suffering, are you doing something to help them? If you have health and you can somehow help the needy, again, I'm not saying you go door to door. I'm not saying that you do things which would put your health in compromise. But are there things that you can do from home to help the needy in the community? I don't want to labor that too much. Let me go to the next slide to show us that even the Quran again speaks about this aspect of when people get quote unquote good from God, they think that they're good. And when people get, when people lose and have loss in their life, they think that, oh, this is something tragic, something is wrong with them or something is wrong with God. And so Surah al-Fajr, chapter 89, verse 15 and 16, something for you and I to think about. Because God says, فَأَمَّا الْإِنسَانِ, as for the human being, you and I, Muslims, human beings, and even non-Muslims should think about this verse. إِذَا مَبْتَلَاهُ رَبُّهُ, that when his Lord tests that believer or that human being who doesn't believe in God, فَأَكْرَمَهُ, and God is generous to him and favors him or her, gender neutral term here. So as for the human being, when his Lord tests him and thus is generous to him and favors him, وَنَعَمَهُ فَيَقُولُ رَبِّي أَكْرَمَنِي, my Lord has honored me. So what we think, people who made it, who have wealth, who have status, who have the big home, who have the nice car, who wear the nice suit, who have the nice handbag, we think, oh, because they've got it all, they've made it, that God has favored them. And then what does God say in the next verse? Verse 16. وَأَمَّا إِذَا مَبْتَلَاهُ فَقَدَرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقَهُ فَيَقُولُ رَبِّي أَهَانَنِي. But when Allah tests that same person and restricts, فَقَدَرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقَهُ, Allah restricts the provision, makes it straightened, tightened, narrowed. Allah takes away from them. فَيَقُولُ رَبِّي أَهَانَنِي, my God, my Lord has humiliated me. So we have to recognize, brothers and sisters, that we cannot think like this mindset that Allah is showing us in Surah al-Fajr. Do not ever think, and I'll show this in a dua from the fourth Imam. Don't ever think that because somebody has wealth or health, that that they've got everything going on, that they're not being tested. And when you see the homeless person, or you see somebody in your family or your community who are struggling to make ends meet, that you think, oh, Allah doesn't like them, Allah doesn't love them, Allah has no favor for them or no blessing for them. No, they are being tested through poverty. And you who have money, you're being tested through your wealth and your health and your ability to solve the problems of humanity. Because God will not just walk down onto earth from a cloud. He will not ascend or descend rather from a cloud and start handing out $100 bills on the street. God won't go to the homeless shelter downtown and start, feeding the people in a soup kitchen. God won't give clothing and hand out jackets and gloves in the winter months when it's snowing and it's minus 10, 20, 30 degrees below zero. That's our responsibility. That's our test. That's why we have been given money by God. This is a very beautiful dua from our fourth Imam, Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein Zain al-Abidin. May God's blessings be upon him. And it will conclude my discussion in the next few moments. But this is supplication number 35 that I would like for you to read and reflect upon. The whole dua ideally, the whole supplication ideally, but at least these 2 lines. And just look at how the fourth Imam, the Imam whom we know was present in Karbala, who witnessed his father Imam Hussein, peace be upon him, massacred, slaughtered. He saw his brothers, his family members killed one after the other. His father's companions were all decimated on the day of Ashura. And in his magnum opus of supplications, the Sahifa, this Sahifatul Kamilat al-Sajjadiyya, this complete book of supplications of Imam al-Sajjad, he says in a portion of dua number 35, وَأَسِمْنِي مِنْ أَنْ أَظُنَّ بِذِي أَدْمٍ خَسَاسَةً. He tells Allah, he says, "O Allah, protect me from ever imagining any inferiority in someone who is poor and destitute." When you walk by that homeless person in downtown Vancouver or wherever you live, downtown Toronto, downtown London, wherever you are, and you walk by that man or woman who's homeless, who doesn't have anything to call their own, they live out of a shopping cart maybe, remember this dua. The fourth Imam tells Allah, "O Allah, protect me from ever thinking that this person who's living on the street has any inferiority to me, or any level of inferiority," because that's not the case. Because that man or woman is poor, it doesn't make them hated by God. Maybe they've made wrong decisions in life. Maybe they were dealt a wrong experience in life. Maybe they did it to themselves. But whatever the case may be, never think of those people to be inferior. And as the Imam says in the very next line of the dua, أَوْ أَظُنَّ بِصَاحِبِ ثَرْوَ فَضْلًا. Never allow me, Allah, protect my thought, protect me from ever imagining any superiority in somebody who possesses wealth. Again, we sometimes think like this, don't we? We see somebody drive to the masjid in their new Merc or their new Lexus or BMW or Ferrari maybe, and we think, wow, God really loves that person. What kind of du'as are they praying? How many hajj have they done to get that kind of a car, to have that big house, to have all of this stuff that they have? We have to get out of that mindset, right? That this verse in Surah al-Hadid, again, we have to go back to the verse that we're reviewing, that we have to look at the world in a different way, brothers and sisters, that it's not as we think it to be. That Allah has recorded everything. These are all examinations by Allah. The people who have money are being tested. People who have nothing are being tested. People who are middle class wage earners are being tested. What will you give to God? Those who have nothing, what will you give out of patience to God, out of sabr, to deal with this difficulty that you are in? And it's up to us to determine where we sit in this equation. I'll conclude the next couple of points that, after the tragedy of Karbala, when the family of the Prophet of Islam were taken from Karbala to Kufa, from Kufa to the city of Sham, present-day Damascus, to be presented in the court of the caliph of the time, the king of the time, the ruler of the time, Yazid, the son of Muawiyah, the son of Abu Sufyan. May Allah deprive all of these individuals of His mercy, and may Allah send them to the place where they deserve to be for all of their atrocities against Islam and the Prophet and his family. When Imam as-Sajjad, peace be upon him, was brought into the court of Yazid, and he was in chains, in shackles, the cursed Yazid recited the following verse of the Quran from chapter 42, Surah Shura, verse 30, to mock the family of the Prophet. It's first of all, it's a surprise for me that he actually knew Quran, being the hypocrite that the man was, and being an outright disbeliever in God, that the man openly claimed that he didn't believe in Islam. That he could even quote Quran is an amazement to me. But he quoted a verse that says, وَمَا أَصَابَكُم مِّن مُّصِيبَةٍ فَبِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِيكُمْ وَيَعْفُو عَنْ كَثِيرٍ. Whatever affliction befalls you, it is because of what your hands have earned, and yet God overlooks many of the wrong that you do. He was telling the fourth Imam, the grandson of Imam Ali, the great-grandson of the Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, may God's blessings be upon him and his family. And obviously, indirectly, he's leveling this accusation against Imam Hussein, peace be upon him, the grandson of Rasulullah, or the son of the Prophet, when you take it from the verse of Mubahala. He's telling the family of the Prophet that while all of this has happened to you, from Karbala, the massacre, and being paraded in Kufa and coming into Sham, into my presence, this is because you yourselves have done this to yourselves. You're to blame. Right? Remember what I said at the beginning? There are certain tests in our life that are our fault. Certain tests that are from Allah that we need to go through. So Yazid was saying that this is your fault. You shouldn't have rebelled against my rule. I'm the legitimate ruler after all, according to their Islam, according to the Islam of Bani Umayyah, according to the Islam of the other schools in Islam who take him as their leader. What did the fourth Imam say? Because he could have just sat there and listened to this blatant accusation against God. The fourth Imam responded with the verse that we are reviewing tonight. He said, Kalla, that is not the case, Yazid. You're foolish, you're mistaken to believe that what we have just gone through is our own fault. He says, Ma nuzilat hadihi fina. This verse was not revealed about us, about this tragedy that we have now had to endure. He says, Innama nuzilat fina. Rather, what has been revealed about us in the Quran and what we are going through today after this day of Ashura is this verse of Surah al-Hadid. Ma asaba min musibatin fil ardi wala fi anfusikum illa fi kitabin min qabli an nabra'aha. That no affliction occurs on the earth or in your own selves except that it is in a book recorded before we bring it into existence. Meaning that what you did in Karbala was not preordained or God telling you to do it or forcing you to kill my father and my brothers and my family and my friends of my father, and taking women captive and children as prisoners and making women widows. This is not God's doing. This is your doing, Yazid. You can't blame us for what happened. You can't blame God and say God planned all of this out and so I'm just running through the actions. No, he says that, yes, this is in a book recorded, this will happen, but don't blame God for it. And again, this is where we had that discussion initially, very briefly, obviously, how to determine what comes from God and what comes from ourselves, how to understand the concept of free will versus predestination, what is the middle ground that the school of the Ahlul Bayt have taught, the teachings of the Prophet's family have given to us. And obviously that, as I said, that is a lengthy discussion and I won't go into it in this session tonight, and we will conclude to continue, God willing, in our next session as we continue in this review of chapter 57. But just to keep in mind that if you are confused of the knowledge of God and what it means, that again, refer to the book Divine Justice of the late Ayatollah Murtada Mutahari, again available online in English. It's called Divine Justice. Or any other books on the topic from the perspective of the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, which clarify the status of where the position is of not having complete free will and not having complete predestination, but rather, as the hadith say, it is something between the two. We conclude, and God willing, we will begin, or we'll continue rather next week in our continuation of this chapter, and we will look at another verse and another concept of this topic, especially of what happens in our lives based on the verses of Surah al-Hadid. Until then, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.